Yeah. Yeah. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's meeting of the Corporate Scrutiny Committee on Monday, the 8th of September. We'll begin with some housekeeping apologies. We don't have any members of the public here with us today, so I think everybody knows where the facilities are. In terms of apologies, we've had apologies from Councillor Coles, who is substituted by Councillor Moroney. So welcome, Councillor Moroney. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Do any members wish to make any declarations of interest not already on their register of interests? Nope. Okay. Agenda item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of July. Are there any matters of accuracy from the minutes? Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. This might not matter, but I'm not listed in the sort of apologies section of the paper, but underneath in the spoken minutes, it says apologies were given for me. I don't know if that has any implications on any sort of tally anywhere, but
we can make sure it doesn't, but it.
Yeah.
Can you reassure me on that point, Jane?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Cheers.
We'll make sure it's reflected on the top of the minutes as well. So are we happy to approve those minutes? Yep. Thank you. Agenda item 4 is, sorry, Councillor Merritt.
Just on the minutes, item 10, there was a letter to be shared as a result of that particular minute. I don't recall seeing it, but do get an awful lot of emails.
Which paragraph?
It's at the end.
Okay. Yes, officers were preparing a response to the letter. This was a letter from Ms. Williams, and I think Councillor Lomas gave a verbal update. Is that, yeah, do you want to give us a quick update, please?
Yes, I think the letter went about a week after the scrutiny committee. I can't be more specific than that, but it was about a week after.
I have a vague recollection of seeing it being copied into it.
Yeah, and it was copied.
Yeah, okay. So if it hasn't been shared more widely, I'll double check and I'll make sure everyone's. I'm pretty sure I was copied into the response.
Yeah. So awful lot of emails and I was away.
That's fine.
After the last.
No need to apologise. So I shall do that, but we're happy to accept the minutes. Thank you. Agenda item 4, public participation. We have one registered speaker today, who is Flick Williams, who's joining us remotely, who wishes to speak in relation to agenda item 5, the 10-year anti-poverty strategy. Can you hear us, Flick?
Yes, good afternoon. Me again, I'm afraid.
That's okay. So you'll have your 3 minutes. I won't give you a reminder, so please do start in your own time.
I wish to speak to the anti-poverty strategy, particularly as it relates to disabled people in the city. Firstly, this paper massively underplays the effects of disablement. Recent analysis by both the Joseph Rowntree Foundation and the Department of Work and Pensions conclude that disability increases poverty vulnerability by 40% relative to non-disabled households. Why is that? Scope calculates that the costs of being a disabled person equate to an average extra £1,000 a month, which is not reflected in disability benefits. And from next April, thanks to the passing of the Universal Credit Act 2025, there will be a 2-tier benefit system in operation, with newly diagnosed chronically sick people receiving less universal credit than existing claimants. Existing claimants forcibly transitioned onto universal credit stand to lose transitional protection if they have a change of circumstances, and this protection erodes going towards 2030, and we still have the TIMS review in the autumn white paper. So disabled people are being made significantly poorer. The solutions outlined here mirror that of government narrative, that work is the solution, But also, like them, there is no recognition that many people are simply too sick to work and are unemployable when employers who regard us as a liability in terms of sickness absence. Of course, I accept the statement that local authorities have limited ability to control economic and systemic factors, but not entirely. This strategy is written in such a way as to give the council a pass. Let's look at some concrete examples of how your actions or inaction are exacerbating problems. Dial-a-ride. It was June 2024 that the report was produced, and yet still no action. A bad situation now made even worse by changes to eligibility for hospital transport, with Health Watch reporting patients are declining appointments because they cannot travel to them. Poor health equals worse life chances equals poverty. Furthermore, the Integrated Care Board is now proposing ending prescriptions for gluten-free food for celiacs in North Yorkshire, potentially giving rise to a £14 a week additional cost for those with this condition. This is a local, not centralised decision, and the solution is not food banks. They simply do not work for many disabled people. For those with food intolerances and other dietary needs such as ARFID, they cannot cater, leading to greater food insecurity for such groups. These are the issues that should be being raised with partners at Health and Wellbeing Board. This strategy simply glosses over the complexities of disabled households and fails to even document additional cumulative barriers in measures to alleviate poverty. The table on page 21 suggests discrimination is a challenge for individuals to overcome adversity rather than an expression of systemic oppression, and is not consistent with a social model approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Flick. I imagine we'll pick some of those items up when we come to discuss the paper that's being shared with us for review today. But thank you for taking the time to register to speak. Okay, I've had a request to move item 7 up the agenda. This is a finance and performance outturn for 24-25, which I'm happy to accept. So if Ian and Patrick would like to join us at the table. So just by way of background, this is information that was shared with executive. I believe it went to the July meeting. Obviously, it is looking back at the previous financial year's performance. We've since had Q1 of the current financial year. So this is obviously historic information. The section of the paper that is relevant to the work of this committee are pages 116 to 119, which focus on the service areas within the remit of this committee. So what I would ask members to think about is, from the information in those pages, are there any issues that members feel potentially warrant further discussion or examination through this committee, through a briefing, through a task and finish group. So if members can bear that in mind when we come to the discussion. So Patrick and Ian, obviously you can take the paper as read, but is there anything you'd like to say by way of introduction?
Thank you, Chair. No, I think you've pretty much said almost word for word what I was about to introduce the report. So yeah, it's obviously pleasing in paragraph 15 that we're in a position where all of the sort of corporate services were able to produce a relatively small underspend, but we're all underspending, which obviously supported the overall position for the council as part of last year. So yeah, that's the key table to work on, and Ian's got a couple of things on performance.
Yeah, and thank you, Chair. Just in terms of performance, there's 7 or 8 indicators. There's no changes in the direction of travel that we've discussed here before. So nothing should be an outlier that we haven't had a conversation on.
Okay. Thank you for that. So I will now open it up to any questions from members, comments on areas of performance that they feel might benefit from further scrutiny. I'll just say briefly on complaints and compliments. We are due to receive a report in November, which is the annual complaints and compliment report that will give us an opportunity to have a sort of a deeper dive into some of the customer service aspects of the report. Councillor Eyre.
Just one question in terms of oversight. Paragraph 18, property. Obviously, property isn't its own line, and property probably in terms of the budget is set at zero variance, but that is quite a large budget in terms of our commercial property income. That has previously been reported to various different committees. I haven't seen a paper for several years now in terms of how our sort of property portfolio is progressing. Is there any intention to bring one of those papers as an update?
I think we do have it planned. I can't remember exactly which scrutiny, whether it's audit and governance or scrutiny, but I think there is a plan to take a report through to one of those. So I'll let you know, Councillor, which one that is.
Thank you. One of the indicators that we do look at, I have looked at in this committee from time to time, is sickness absence. I think in the past when we've received papers, it's been in relation to a change of approach that the council has been trialling in terms of, was it Medigold? Some years back was an initiative aimed at reducing sickness absence. It's clear from the data that the rate of absence isn't going in a direction that we would want it to. That is something that members may wish to receive a briefing on in terms of the work that I know that the council is doing to support staff in terms of managing attendance. That's something we may want to return to, but it's something that potentially the chair and the vice chair and I can discuss with officers in terms of what would be useful for this committee to do. But I know it's something we have done work on in the past, and it's something we might want to keep in mind for potentially a briefing or a task and finish group. Yeah. Okay. Councillor Maroney.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy for you to rule this question as unhelpful at this point, but I just wondered whether our experts had any thoughts on spending in adult and social care, or whether that should be parked into a specific meeting.
Probably for the People Scrutiny Committee to look at and to query and to investigate. So there's not something that we would look at this committee. But if officers want to answer, by all means.
Well, I think to properly get to the bottom of it, you really need the right people around the table, and that would be the Director of Adult Social Care and the team in there. So whilst we can give sort of high-level views on it, I think to get the proper information that you require needs that level of depth, which is best done with the People Scrutiny and the right people around the room, really.
Yeah.
I'm happy with both of those contributions. Just strikes me it's a recurring thing that's too difficult, too big, and it's obviously a huge risk to setting budgets. So I just wondered at that high level whether there are any comments, but I'm quite happy to withdraw at this point. Thank you.
I think it's opportune that there is a task and finish group looking at budget setting for next year, and that will invariably be one of the areas that will be being looked at in terms of better understanding of the reason for the increase in cost and increase in need, which then leads to the increase in cost. So I'm sure it's something the task and finish group will be looking at, won't it, Councillor? Well, there you go. So you can come find the answers for us. But yeah, it's been all the time I've been on the council, it's been a recurring thing, but there's so deep-seated issues are something that aren't unique to you. Councillor. Yes.
Completely the other end of the spectrum. I think I did raise this last time, and I'm not sure we got to the bottom of it. The average speed of answer on the call centre on calls. We sort of raised the question, is this the time it takes for an automation system to pick it up and say, thank you for calling City of York Council, press 1 if you want, press 2 if you want, press 3 if you want, etc.? Or is it actually the time it takes for someone to get through to wherever it is and speak to whoever they want to speak to?
That's always nice and easy to say. I mean, maybe something needs to come back with just the process line and then the different counts, the different sections, because we can count up the time it takes to go through the automation, then get answered by a customer centre representative, or if it's passed on to a service area, of which the automation does, what the time is to pick up there. So there's lots of lenses you can look at it through. Maybe for Councillor Earl, I could just share a little bit of that outside of the committee to see if it's useful. I mean, we put it into the public domain, yeah, and then it can go back through the group if others are interested.
No, if there's a different way of breaking it down that helps answer that question, I'm sure we'd all, for our education, it would all be helpful to know. Councillor Taylor.
Thanks, Chair. Councillor sort of half asked where I was going with my own question, really. I think it would be really helpful to have more detail on those average speed of answers, because, and I think this committee is a good place because it cuts across different service areas. It's not much use if it takes 40 seconds to get through to the customer service centre, but then when you put through to waste services or adult social care or council tax, you wait on hold for a long time or you don't get through. And I think if we're looking at customer service, that bit is probably the majority of the customer service journey post that initial, if you like, triaging of that call. Not easy, and I don't like creating more work, trust me. I don't think people will believe me when I say that, but I'm being genuine. But I think it would be more helpful. Otherwise, it doesn't really have much value as is. But I'd be happy to have a deeper look at it with yourself and Councillor Eyre and anyone else who's interested, if you want to share us more info outside the meeting.
So between myself and Ailey Carragher, head of customers, we actually have a good performance regime set up there where everything's monitored weekly, looks at all the different process lines, look at those step-offs. My suggestion would be is Ailey and I look to put something together on the data statistical side first, something for the committee members to look at, and then maybe bring back here as an item in the future if you want to ask more questions about it. If I look to do that, I'll do that over the next few weeks. Okay.
Cheers.
I think that'd be helpful, and then once we've got the information, we can decide if a smaller group want to do a ask and finish group or just have an informal discussion. Any other questions or comments for Patrick or Ian? No. Thank you for coming and asking to go on first, and then you can enjoy the rest of your evenings. Thank you. So we'll now go back to the agenda and move to agenda item 5, which is the 10-year anti-poverty strategy. So we're joined by Pauline Stutchfield, Claire Fole and Sam Blythe. So welcome all. So just by way of background, this is coming to this committee for pre-decision scrutiny. The draft strategy is currently out for public consultation. This is an opportunity for this committee to feed in its comments and suggestions. Obviously, individually, we're all able to respond to the consultation personally as well. But this is an opportunity for us to have a more structured discussion. So who would like to introduce the paper? Pauline.
Thanks, Chair. You did a good job for me there, actually. But this is a really important strategy. I think it's a while since the council has approved a 10-year strategy, and this is a critical one in tackling poverty. Now, in terms of the actions that we need to take immediately to tackle all of the impacts that we've seen locally and nationally around cost of living, and with the local pressures that we have around cost of housing and cost of living. as you say, this is, sorry, I'll go back to the beginning, to tackle the short-term changes, but also to take a prevention approach and then to take a long-term systems change approach. So we're asking you to look at those 3 levels. This consultation has been underway for a few weeks. It's due to finish at the end of September, and your feedback is critical to this. It has been developed in partnership with our key partners across the city. And we are talking to community groups over the next couple of weeks as well to get their feedback. What I would say is read this report alongside the next report. The next report is much more around the potential solutions to those long-term impacts. So your next report is a portfolio of investable propositions in York, which sets out, as you can see, a bold, ambitious programme of development for the city, leading to significant resident benefits, including more well-paid jobs, more affordable homes, and more accessible and sustainable development. So the next report is very much part of the solution to some of the issues that are raised in this report. We have got some feedback from the first 100 responses to the consultation, and I thought it might be useful for you to hear some of that feedback now. So in terms of the biggest causes of poverty in York, most respondents, 82%, identified the high cost of housing as the primary cause of poverty in York, followed by low pay or insecure work at 68%. Energy or fuel costs were also seen as a significant factor, 25%. In terms of the main objectives of the strategy, in terms of helping people in poverty right now, taking a preventative approach to stop people falling into poverty and creating that long-term system change. I think it's fair to say people saw this as all as equal priorities. They should all be tackled, with a slight increase on tackling long-term change. In terms of missing priorities, respondents called for greater emphasis on housing affordability, which is not a surprise, transport costs, childcare, back to work support, and skills development for the future. Additionally, the need for more community involvement, mental health support, and using the council's procurement powers to drive fair work and generate revenue were highlighted as essential to a more holistic and effective strategy. Just in response to the public speaker, support for all people experiencing poverty, there was a strong sentiment that people in poverty need dignified, accessible support that empowers them to move out of poverty with independence. This includes practical support such as financial stability, access to financial stability, affordable housing, fair work, and community-based services. The responses emphasise the importance of joined-up, non-judgmental help that is easy to access and supports long-term independence, and that absolutely rings with the outcomes from the Poverty Truth Commission findings. Linked to that, then, they also stress the importance of the council and local organisations listening to those in poverty, providing that the housing, local job opportunities, and better access to services, especially face-to-face support. We've been talking about the phone systems, but they prefer face-to-face support. Focus on prevention, education, and working collaboratively across sectors was seen as essential. We'll be bringing you the neighbourhood model in the next couple of months, and that's absolutely critical to all partners working across systems, working together to support people. A significant portion of respondents, 55%, felt that people with lived experience of poverty are not genuinely heard or included in local decision making, despite the findings of the Poverty Truth Commission. And therefore, calls for more inclusive engagement and transparent decision making were essential to this key feedback. Sadly, despite the strategy's ambition, there was a significant lack of confidence in its implementation. Over half of respondents were not very confident that meaningful action would be taken, with only 11% feeling very confident. And this indicates to us a clear need for the council to demonstrate tangible actions that people can believe in, and for us to build trust with residents. So in conclusion, there is a strong call for more clarity, detailed action, and genuine inclusion of people with lived experience in decision making, affordable housing, fair wages, and support for local job creation remain at the heart of the solutions proposed, with a focus on long-term sustainable change. Thank you, Chair. Sam's going to briefly walk you through the strategy itself.
Thank you. Thanks, Pauline. Thanks, Chair. So the strategy itself was developed with partners from the Financial Inclusion Steering Group and others. It was also utilised best practice from elsewhere in the country. So good examples of that being Newcastle, Bolton and North East Combined Authority. We had the opportunity to talk at the Resolve Poverty Conference, which took place in Manchester a few months ago, to talk about the aspirations of the anti-poverty strategy to a wide audience of representatives from think tanks and expert groups. We also had the opportunity to talk to stakeholders and experts at a conference that took place under the auspices of the University of York. That was a really useful seminar. Claire attended, I believe, that session, and an opportunity just to provide a framework for the strategy itself. In terms of our definition of poverty, we utilise the Joseph Rowntree Foundation definition of poverty, and we hope that the strategy will lead to a one defined definition of poverty in the City of York, which we can all use as partners to move forward in this work. As a principle, we look at poverty through a relative resource gap perspective, i.e. the resources that are available to people to overcome the issues around poverty itself. This was developed by the Social Metric Commission. In terms of some of the feedback from the consultation that Pauline referred to a moment ago, one of the ideas around the definition of poverty, which is when a person's resources are not enough to meet their minimum needs, includes social participation. And that was a key aspect that was brought up in terms of some of the feedback in the consultation so far, about the idea that being able to participate in the life around you and the communities around you is very important to people. Just to reflect on some of the data points, I had the opportunity to take some time off and come back to the anti-poverty strategy, having to spend a little bit of time away. And one thing I would say is, in terms of the information contained, the data points, I think it could be clearer in terms of the information provided. So that was something I'm going to take away as feedback personally, to look at the strategy from a different perspective. This, in fact, builds on a system called RAPID, which is the real-time analysis of poverty indicators dashboard. This was developed with the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, and it's utilised by the London boroughs currently. And this is an opportunity to look at it from a York perspective. So what it does is provide an indicative poverty rate, which considers the percentage of households below a selected income threshold out of all the households in receipt of benefits. So ultimately, as you would expect, the impact might be that we expect benefit recipients to be more likely to experience lower standards of living and higher rates of poverty than the population as a whole. Hence why kind of the figures might look quite high in the table. What we'll do is take that away and kind of reframe that, so it looks clearer to the public eye, because it's something that's come back in the feedback from the consultation. Just in terms of the framework around that, I'm going to become a business school here now. Basically, the Three Horizons framework, which looks at the here, the now, and the medium term and the future, is an opportunity for us to consider things in those three spectrums. That's not to say we won't only look at things in the future, what happened in the future. They're all kind of a continuous momentum of information and challenge and actions. So things what we're in the turning the tide to create long-lasting change may happen now, and may start now, but they've got long-term implications. And as Pauline referenced, some of that's contained in the next item for the committee to consider.
Thank you very much. Before I open it up, just wanted to ask for clarification on one point. The paragraph 14, there's a list of groups that you'll be engaging with, and York Access Forum is down with sort of TBC. I'm just mindful of the comments from the public speaker. How are you planning to engage with the Access Forum?
Yes, so unfortunately, we've not been able to arrange a date with the Access Forum. However, we've been in contact with the chair and have asked for feedback directly from her and also members of the forum to respond to the consultation. She circulated the consultation to members, and we're grateful for any feedback received from that group.
Thank you for that. So I'll open it up to comments and questions from members. Councillor Merritt.
It's really a follow-on from your question. I just wondered, in terms of that list, how was that compiled? Because there's obviously a lot of other organisations out there that you know, may have things to say. So I just wondered why these particular ones and why not others. You know, has there been some process in terms of invitation, and these are the ones who are interested in participating and others aren't, or what?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor. So we're happy to engage with absolutely everyone and anyone to talk about this strategy. This list is just a list as developed at this point in time. We're looking to engage with further interested stakeholders, including Poverty Truth Commissioner members. We'll be actively engaged with them. We're in the process of setting up meetings, but unfortunately at this point in time, we haven't got a set date, but we will endeavour to meet with them before the end of the consultation period, and we'll continue to engage with them. Similarly, other groups have not referenced here, but may include education groups, children's forums, and other relevant groups as well. But as I said, happy to meet and talk to anybody who's interested in this strategy.
Thank you. So, members, we've got an opportunity to feed into what is obviously still a live piece of work in terms of other areas that you think are missing from the strategy, or areas that need to be better explained or better framed. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for this paper, officers. Something I say often when we get draft strategies coming to scrutiny is sort of, what does this mean that we're not going to do as a result of going in this direction? Or what might we stop, or what might change on the ground? And while I realise this isn't an action plan, there is a point where strategies meet action plans so that people can make sense of, well, what's it going to mean to us on the ground? And that probably touches on some of what the public speaker tapped into. So I wondered if we're taking feedback, it might help to make clear what York isn't going to do to sort of clarify its direction, because otherwise I think there's a danger that it reads as a lot of padding, which is setting the scene, you know, what's the definition of poverty, etc., etc. And then in terms of what York will do, there's a lot of very agreeable, nice language, but I don't sort of, maybe it's just me, I don't really see how that sets us apart, or how we can, or how I can say, well, York as a council is doing this distinct thing or this particular thing compared to other places. It just feels a bit generalist. So anything that can be done to help with that, I would appreciate, but that's just me.
Thank you. Just the point I was going to make, that I'll make on the back of yours, the page 38 in the agenda pack, the strategic delivery plan, which has sort of challenge and example of what we will do, again, none of which I would disagree with. And this may be what appears in an action plan, but I would expect to see a column saying who, when, how, just to give it for the reader a bit more of a sense of, in terms of aspiration, this is what we would hope to do, who we think would do it, and how that would happen. Appreciate it's difficult to pin everything down, but maybe that's an example of how it could be made less general and a bit more specific in terms of highlighting things that we could do. But if you'd like to respond to Councillor Taylor's point.
Yeah, that's an absolute fair challenge. The plan is that following the consultation and getting to an approved position for the strategy, we develop a much more detailed action plan with the Financial Inclusion Steering Group that draws on some of the challenges really set to us through the consultation. So the public speaker gave us a couple of examples that we can look at from a council perspective, but there's lots coming out, as you'd expect, from the consultation of people who are actually living this at the moment, who are experiencing these issues, telling us what they think we should be doing. Obviously, we can't do everything, so that's another thing. We'll take your point about what we can't do, but absolutely we want to set out quite a detailed action plan based on action plans that I think probably have come to here before. Certainly like the corporate improvement plan. I don't know if you can remember that one where it's, yeah, action, who, what, when,
Yeah.
etc. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. I think my sort of interest came kickstart from looking at the information on my ward, and I was quite surprised at the level of poverty in that particular area. And then I got to thinking of what that probably is, and that probably is quite age related. And that sort of, which then fed into some of the things of the public speaker as well. And I got to that point of thinking there's two different ends of that spectrum, aren't there? So that's what I thought on page 28, I couldn't really see, because it's sort of wrapped up into that increased and complex needs. If we're talking about, for example, older people and disabled people as the thing there, that is sort of a static point that's going on there. If you're a retired individual, you have the state pension, or you have your state pension and you have potentially a private pension, but that in itself is fixed. Your costs are then going to be starting to rise exponentially. I'm not going to mention triple lock and get into any of that kind of things, but that isn't something that you're ever going to solve. There's no amount of education or training. There's no amount of work we can do in the economy to improve economic opportunity, rise wages, etc. It's never going to hit that cohort of people. If you are disabled and there are certain things you are and aren't able to do, again, no amount of interventions are we going to be able to do. We'll be able to tackle some of those issues. So there's almost, to me, what I didn't see in that is that sort of health and age level of stuff. It's very, very good on the areas we're saying about starting at a young age, making sure that we're tackling the education issues, making sure people have the opportunities, increasing employment opportunities as people get there. But there's a certain point where actually none of that is going to work. And so what do we do for the 10, 15, 20 years at the end of somebody's life, for example, where they're going to keep getting pushed with very little options in terms of how we do that one? And if they're claiming every single benefit that's available, to which we know not everybody is, but we know, for example, pension credit doesn't apply to anyone on the state pension. So if you're just receiving a state pension, there's nothing we can do in terms of increasing benefit uptake, etc. That gap is just going to keep getting exponentially worse. And that was the bit that I thought I didn't really see in this paper of that cohort of people, and actually their acceptance that, yeah, this works brilliantly from this end and the intervention's early and everything, but what do we do towards the end? And then just to dovetail as well, I think we sort of feed through to that is the KPIs don't feel like they really cover everything that's in the strategy. Again, it's difficult, and KPIs are not some of my favourite things, but they are measures of certain things that we have in the council plan already. That sort of, it feels like what we've done is go through the council plan indicators and go, these are the ones that sort of apply to that, and transfer those across, rather than actually starting and going, what are the indicators that we want to measure this strategy against? And if they're not in the current suite that we use for the council, we need to add them into this, because it doesn't really cover. I mean, the vast majority is life expectancy in the free school meals. It's a very small part of the entire strategy. So how we look to flesh it out to really know that we're actually being able to measure this and what we're achieving.
Thank you. Do you like to pick any of those points up?
No, thank you. That's really helpful feedback, actually. And I didn't mean actually, of course, it's really helpful feedback. I think it identifies and draws out the challenge we've got around the 3 strategic objectives working in parallel, but actually tackling poverty today has a more defined cohort that today might continue for a long period of time, because those individuals in today are not, their circumstances aren't going to change, just get worse. Whereas actually the longer lasting change, you can tackle a younger age group essentially, because you can set them up for the future. So it's an absolute fair challenge. I think we'll just need to think about how we visually present that in their strategy, so it doesn't get more confusing, if you like. And we'll take that away and think about how to demonstrate those different cohorts, maybe thinking about a definition around the cohorts that demonstrates a kind of static circumstance versus a dynamic circumstance, if you like.
Thank you.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think there is a lot we can do to support those at the static stage of their life, for whatever reason, to ensure that we're still meeting all of their needs. they do have access to all the benefits they're entitled to, that they have access to support if their circumstances change, for example, if they're at risk of homelessness, and thinking about the wider determinants of health, how close services are to them. Are they at risk of isolation, which means that they don't get the support that they need? So I think you're quite right to challenge us on those where the needs are more static but present, ever present throughout the life of the strategy. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Widdowson.
Thank you. It's very ambitious. Right? It's a good paper. It's very ambitious, and I think I echo an awful lot of what has been said in the room already. What would be lovely to see in each of the 3 areas as it goes through is what concrete steps can we take, right? Because, you know, what Councillor Taylor said, which is it's all nice and it's in that right direction, but what exactly do we mean? If the reports that you're getting back from everybody who you've talked to is the high cost of housing, you've got a whole area there. So what? And what actually can we do? Rather than pretend what we can do. So what is it we need to do? When you talk about where is it? It's in here, the high cost of essential goods. When you look at the map as to where people are, if there aren't buses to get them into town, or if the bus has gone up from £2 to £3, you know, how are we making sure that people can actually move around? And the one thing that I did think and I know it's each tranche is the same because it's used all the same type of words, so there will be different actions in there. But one of the things that I didn't see in any of it as well is AI. So AI is having the biggest impact on white collar jobs ever. It's doing exactly what happened to blue collar jobs in the 1980s. So what are we doing to make sure that people are upskilled, not trained or coached? How are they being upskilled into the area that is coming? I think, you know, it's good. Just, I think exactly what everybody else is saying. Can we have the detail? Otherwise it's a bit motherhood and apple pie, and you don't want it to be that way.
I think some of the upskilling, some of that will come through in the next paper, but it needs to be referenced here as well in terms of challenge, solution. I think there is a link there. Sam?
Just to say as well, 10 years is a long time, isn't it? So if you think about this, a 10-year strategy, 10 years back, what conversations we would have now, we probably wouldn't have guessed kind of what would have happened in terms of pandemics, in terms of cost of living crises. It's a challenge that we need to be wary of and thinking ahead, as you point out, Councillor, around AI, the differences that we're going to make in terms of the way we live.
Thank you. Just a couple of points I picked out in terms of we can maybe include something around what we can do as a landlord, as a housing provider. I may have missed it, but it would seem to be something that we've got more chance of doing something about than than in other settings. So that it'd be worth sort of championing what we do and what we can do. Maybe something linking to the transformation work in terms of how the work that will be underway, looking at how the council functions, making sure that this is at the core of that, and certainly making sure that we don't undermine what's in here through things that are happening elsewhere in the authority. Not that I think that's a risk, but I think it'd be worth drawing it out just to make the point that this strategy sits with all of the others, and you know, I think it's there's a lot of criticism of short-termism, but the reference to the 10-year strategies agreed in the ones that go through to 2032, it's important that we don't just keep churning out strategies and say, oh yeah, we did some a few years ago. I wonder what they said. You know, and we're not doing that here. We're referencing what is contained in the other strategies, which is important. Just making sure that we're adding value, and we're making sure that they all hang together. Anyone else have any other bits of feedback they want to chip in. Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chair. Just two separate points. There's a brief mention of the Mayor in here about general sort of creates healthy and thriving communities. But I think it'd probably be helpful to point to some specific things that the Mayor is doing with the Adult Skills Fund. We were talking about how important it is to sort of start children off on that path, not leading to poverty. But I think there's, we've got something in the region for adults that's a lot of money has come through from government. And then the other point that I was going to make is about the two-child benefit cap. That obviously wasn't around 10 years ago. It was introduced in 2017, and that has had and continues to have a devastating impact on children and on families. So I don't know whether we could mention that in there. I mean, I hope it doesn't exist in 10 years' time, but I just think what we were touching on earlier about the difference that 10 years makes, and that has had, a horrible impact on poverty.
Thank you. Care to respond to any of those points?
Just thank you for those points. Yeah, absolutely recognise what you're saying, Councillor. We'll look into adding more about the mayors more generally anyway, because you're right, it's just a sort of passing reference. But the other thing we'll need to make sure is that we work really closely with the combined authority to reflect our deprivation. So York's deprivation is similar in kind of data stretch, so the spectrum of North Yorkshire, but of course in very different makeup and very different pockets given our urban environment and also the concentration sort of around the city centre. So it's different for us, the kind of challenges and the kind of opportunities than it is to North Yorkshire. So we do have a role sort of negotiating and working closely with the combined authority on that.
Thank you. Councillor Merritt.
Yes, welcome the paper too, and the progress that's being made on this, and echo a lot of what's been said around the table. Just sort of picking up on Anna's last point, I think that flags an issue. You talked about the role of councils in page 20 of the papers, and making the point we're not responsible for setting national policy, etc. Don't feel entirely comfortable with that particular phrase. Yes, we don't set national policy, but we do lobby, and I think that is actually, one of council's important roles, raising issues that we discover that national government is not necessarily aware of or not properly cited on. And so I think there needs to be a more nuanced description, particularly of the last sentence of that paragraph on the role of councils, and that partly addresses the public speaker's comment that we're giving ourselves a get out, where perhaps we shouldn't be.
I'll take that on board. I'll reflect that back in the feedback. Thank you.
Any other comments or points I'd like to feed back? So just in summary, some of the suggestions members have made is wherever possible include more detail on the how, the who, the when, the why. Picking up or having a more explicit reference to health and age as determinants, and how that group may need sort of separate consideration given some of the interventions maybe won't be as relevant for that cohort. Looking at the KPIs, creating new ones if the ones that we have from the council plan KPI suite perhaps don't cover everything we would want them to cover. More explicit reference to mayoral combined authority actions and how they can support the strategy. Being more explicit about what the council can do and does as a landlord. Linked to the wider context in terms of the council's transformation piece, and to lobby government, because if we don't ask, we probably won't get. Is there anything that we've missed?
I'll just
Yeah.
raise one other issue. We've obviously talked about the problem of low pay. And there's reference to the living wage and our local charter. I wonder whether there should be more emphasis on that. If you actually look at what's happened with poverty, poor pay, and so on, between the Second World War and the 1970s, there was a growth of the relative proportion of income that people in ordinary jobs enjoyed. But since the sort of Thatcher Reagan period, that has stabilised, and the share of income generated that is going to capital and in effect the extremely wealthy has increased consistently since then, whereas the majority of the population has not enjoyed benefits both here and in other countries, US and so on. So one of the key issues in terms of that determination obviously is national taxation policies and so on. Another is obviously the traditional role that trade unions played in terms of giving more leverage to working people in that negotiation of the share of the cake from employment. So perhaps some strengthening of the text in terms of supporting and encouraging collective bargaining, union recognition, and all those types of issues in terms of redressing the balance, which we can hope to try and influence locally, not just nationally, ought to be in there.
Yeah, I'm sure that can be considered with all of the feedback in terms of as one of the aspects of tackling low wages and potentially poor employment practices, which potentially feed low pay and insecure employment, which is maybe something that can be brought out. Because I'm sure there's our friends at the Joseph Rowntree, if I've done reports on most things, I'm pretty sure that they will have done some work on that, and that it'll be interesting to see if that comes back through the feedback in terms of, is it just low pay, or is it the nature of employment that feeds insecurity and the inability to yeah, not providing a basis for secure housing tenures, etc. Yeah, but as Councillor Merritt suggested, I suppose we're limited in what the council can do about it, but it's still something that we should be mindful of and look at what we can do. Thank you for raising that. Councillor Maroney.
Thank you, Chair. This may well be stating the obvious, so again, apologies, but I just wonder if it could be stressed that there's an iterative process going on. So we're seeking fresh views from people who've kindly participated to this document, and whether we could highlight that we'll be seeking best practices from other councils. Thank you.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned you've been to events where you've looked at what London boroughs are doing and others, and yeah, there's obviously no need to reinvent a wheel if one has already been invented.
Yep. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this item, I've talked to a number of different local authorities and the North East Combined Authority as well. Continue to have those conversations, most recently with Bradford Council as well, around the development of their anti-poverty strategy. There's a lot of synergies between all the different strategies, as you can probably imagine, but the specificity around York, as well as we talked about at this meeting, I think is clear that needs to be further reflected in the strategy.
Yeah, and just finally, I was looking in the report for a recognition of the different contexts in terms of urban poverty, rural poverty, and it was in there. So just thank you for kind of unpicking that, which I think is often overlooked. So thank you for including it. Okay, thank you very much for bringing this to us for input, and good luck with going through all the rest of the feedback, which I'm sure you're going to get between now and the 29th. Yeah, thank you for your time. So we now move on to agenda item 6, next steps for securing investment in York. So we've lost Pauline, but we've retained Claire and Sam. So again, just by way of background for colleagues who are maybe new to this committee, it was around this time last year that this committee and other scrutiny committees undertook some pre-decision scrutiny to inform a pipeline of investable projects, some more detailed than others, in anticipation of the mayoral combined authority, which at that point was still new in terms of having an elected mayor, to give us an idea of the things that we could attract funding for. Obviously, a year has gone past, and we don't just have a pipeline; we have a prospectus. So if you can outline what this is and what you would like from us, please.
Thank you, Chair. So thanks for inviting us to present today the proposed plan for securing investment in the city. It builds on the work, as you've mentioned, on the security committees we worked with last year, which helped us shape the mayoral pipeline of projects, which was approved by the leader in July last year. The prospectus in front of you today, it's a bold and ambitious programme of development. It brings together significant resident benefit, which helps with the discussion we've just had around turning the tide, so looking at that longer lasting change, particularly in terms of getting more money into residents' pockets with better jobs, more affordable housing, more independent living accommodation, housing first accommodation, key worker accommodation, as well as accessible and sustainable development. It deliberately follows the anti-poverty strategy today because essentially it's the proposed response to turning the tide and becoming an anti-poverty city by finding new ways to put more money in residents' pockets, including rediverting investment into the city into community wealth as defined by our social value outcome framework, which came to a ordinate and governance meeting, I'm going to say yes, recently. It is unfunded. So it is designed to help us identify those projects that would most benefit residents and attract public or private investment, including, but not exclusively, from the combined authority. We are currently gathering the economic and social impact of the different projects to inform future business cases, but following Sam's summary of the process, which I'll come on to in a minute, we'd be really keen to hear from the committee today about your preferred priorities to help us shape the items that we need to focus on first. And just to make it clear, this is a plan for the city development, but it is not preempting the planning process. So there are certain items within the projects listed in front of you today, which have been through planning and others which have not. So we just need to make that quite clear. It's not part of the preemptive planning process. I'll hand over to Sam.
Thank you, Claire. So as mentioned, this is effectively a look back and a look ahead. So they look back after just over a year around the investable proposition pipeline. So that's contained as Annex A in terms of the work that's gone on in terms of securing funding from the combined authority to progress those projects. Building on that work, we then have started to create the prospectus, which is Annex B. This also is informed by the shift in the policy landscape since we last met to discuss the pipeline. So, for instance, the development of the economic framework, the local growth plan at the combined authority level, and also at a national level around the industrial strategy. So it hopes to inform and be informed by those different items. Similarly, in terms of our work, it continues to look at trying to build in around the 2032 vision and the 10-year strategies as well. So it's basically an opportunity to really consider where we are and where we want to get to in terms of the development of the city, set a clear narrative, and there's a conversation starter as Claire referenced as well. Just note, and probably linking back to the previous item as well, Other places do have prospectuses. I'm going to say prospectuses rather than prospecti, for including places such as Blackpool, and they utilise that as in terms of conversation starters with government and others to secure funding. So this is an opportunity for York to have a similar document, to have to something that we can put on front of the mayor, in front of ministers, to say this is what York wants from a prospectus, what it wants as a pipeline of projects to move forward. I'll stop there.
Okay, so obviously this is a work in progress, and there are sort of TBCs, which I suppose may make it difficult to prioritise without understanding the thinking back to what we've just discussed in terms of the impact that some of the schemes could have in terms of generating jobs, generating housing, but I think that they're explained to a sufficient degree of detail that gives us an idea of what the proposition is. So I'd invite comments from members, I suppose, on the projects that have been included. Any you think are missing? Any you think that how they're framed? If you've got any comments on what the prospectus says about what we're about as a city, I guess. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start with a warning. The last time we collaborated with Blackpool, we ended up with Vic Reeves in the Museum Gardens, and then internationally renowned disaster of an event. So just be careful all the things we share with those. I think for me, and you mentioned that word prioritising, and that's what we came to last time, funding and prioritisation, and that's where I find this really difficult. Now, the update that we've got here is Annex A, really useful, being able to see that green yellow and what we're getting on with, what we're not getting on with, etc. I've had to have my iPad obviously because I can't see the green and yellow on my favourite paper copy, but that is really helpful in terms of seeing what we're getting to. That obviously then leaves a considerable amount of schemes in white, which is the bit that we're focusing on. A 10-year strategy is never a 10-year strategy. We're already 3 years into that 10-year strategy, so we've got 7 years left to start deliver on all of those white areas. The reality is probably not going to be able to deliver on all of those white areas in that timeframe period, which is absolutely not a problem. That's the ambition we should be doing. But it becomes really difficult to say, how do we go around prioritising without a clear idea of what resources are available to us or potentially available to us, and how that aligns with some of those. If we were talking about £1.2 billion worth of investment coming in, then we can sit and go, right, fantastic, we'll start with that one, we'll start with that one, we'll start with that one, here are a few quick wins we can be doing in the background, etc. If it's going to be a relatively limited pot, and we really need to start looking and saying, what are the 2 or 3 really important key ones that we need to get on and delivering? So some of us, for example, might say the York Outer Ring Road. Some of us would say completely the opposite to York Outer Ring Road. But if the funding is absolutely nowhere near available to get to that, then it's pretty ridiculous prioritising that in your prospectus. So I think that was, and we did ask last time when it came through, and it was very early stages, and we had a long conversation about there's no numbers in here, there's still no numbers in here, and there's still no real estimates. I think getting that in, and a realistic sense of what is available from the combined authority, potentially from national government, we can then have a better informed discussion around what is it that we want to prioritise. And the flip side of that is we probably haven't done any of that work in terms of, or maybe we have, it hasn't been as obvious in terms of how we prioritise the greens. I'm taking an example with significant mayoral investment in the station gateway. We had an extra £4 million going in to the station gateway. There was very little discussion in terms of perspective. I'm not trying that one again. In terms of whether we would have prioritised that £4 million on other schemes in a particular pipeline, and actually said, you know what, if we accept that, then we're going to lose X, Y, and Z out of our pipeline of projects. That never happened in terms of that. It just sort of comes along, and then that, which leads to that question: if it's mayoral led, and the mayor is actually going to go through and go, well, actually, I like that one, I like that one, I like that one. That's what you can have the money for. Then we don't have to do the prioritisation because it's sort of irrelevant. So that's where I am in a nutshell.
Okay, thank you. So I think there's a request for numbers in order to, I suppose, assist with the prioritisation.
So we're pulling together the economic and social value, which will help with that piece of work. However, and it hasn't happened yet, but we don't want to miss out on knowing what our priorities are should we be told you've got £4 million to spend on something. Now, taking Councillor Ayres' point, there's a good chance the Mayor might say, well, I'm only interested in X, and we might all say, well, we want you to fund Y, and the Mayor's like, we're not interested in Y, we only want to do X. But if we are clear on what our priorities are as a city, it will help the people who are in the room talking about that 4 million, 10 million, 20 million pounds, whatever it is, be able to have an informed discussion. And right now, we don't really have a set of priorities. We have a long list of potential options. And we've tried to get to a point of prioritisation, hence the reason we're going through we're asking an independent economic assessment of the economic impact and the social impact. So we've got a better chance of understanding the impact for residents or the outcomes for residents. But we don't want to lose the opportunity just in case, just in case that funding suddenly makes itself available. What I will say is that if you take something like Trailblazers, where the Combined Authority were given with no real prior warning £10 million to spend on encouraging what they call the economically inactive back into work, we weren't ready. So we didn't know what schemes we would put forward, and we had about maybe 4 or 6 weeks to put that together. So if we can get ahead of the game, thinking that at any point Treasury might say, oh, York, we haven't given you anything for a while, what can we give you? We need to be ready for it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So sorry, it's not a clear answer.
No. There's no. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. It's a difficult one, because I take your reply back to Councillor Ayres, but maybe this is a bit too much of a meta question, but is there not a danger with this sort of thing where huge amounts of staff time get spent writing about lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of things which are going to be great, but may or may not happen, in the hope that 1 or 2 of them might happen? This just seems to be a sort of, I'm guessing it's happening in councils across the country, but this seems to be borderline insane. And we go from one document to another document. It's a strategy, it's a pipeline, it's a prospectus. At which point in this timeline of events can we have A, clarity in the things that we want, and B, a sense of what we might get? I know that I'm getting, this is a bit potentially too large for this, but I struggle with it. And while I take what the officer's saying, as an officer that has to try and get a job done, it is still difficult to do anything with this without a sense of numbers, let alone what is or isn't actually possible. It just seems like we're just passing PDFs around for months and years on end. Sorry to be so cynical.
No.
And it's sad because there's so much good stuff in there that could happen.
Yeah.
Maybe this is a call to government. I don't know. What do we all think? Chair, officers.
I think there is a sort of a move away, an attempt to move away from the the kind of, they were described as beauty parades. There's some money available. There's a scrum to grab some of the money, and the whole point of devolution was to try and take some of that. Spending a lot of officer time to bid for something that might never come. So that it could be that's still happening, just on a regional basis rather than on a national basis. So that, I think that's a danger, and that is something that can be fed back to government. But yeah, because we don't want to repeat the mistakes of the past in terms of the council's wasting a huge amount of time and effort chasing those pots. And then you're thinking, on what basis was that decision made? It's trying to take some of that stuff out of it. But I suppose the decision makers still need a basis on which to decide whether to invest in X or Y. So I suppose this is providing information that any funder would want, whether that's government or mayoral. But yeah, I know when I read it and I saw the sentence that says, none of this stuff must incur any cost to the council on an ongoing basis. I just thought, so we can build stuff, but we can't maintain it. And then I walked away and then came back again. And thought, no, I will carry on reading this. So I think we've all had those kind of feelings of despair. But then thinking, no, this is, we often say, well, this is the game in town, so we have to engage with it. But I understand your frustrations. Claire?
Thank you, Chair. It's absolutely that. It's to stop officers running off and coming. I mean, the way I've described it with other officers is to stop individuals deciding we're going to have knitting dolphins in Scarborough. So some crazy idea that somebody has that thinks it's a great idea and off they go. Is to try and focus us officers to work with the administrations and the elected members to focus on what you want for the city, rather than there's a pot of money for some crazy idea. Let's often run after that one, like kids chasing a ball. So it's to try and provide a little bit of strategic oversight that gives you all the opportunity to feed into it. I absolutely recognise it's really hard to prioritise. It's been really hard to prioritise ever since we've started this process, really. But we've managed to get ourselves a list of things that everybody in at least the officer cohort can say we could deliver that with this amount of funding. Some of those things are more important or potentially more important than others, like unlocking the outer ring road for certain areas would unlock different bits of the local plan. The actual unlocking the local plan is essentially the community infrastructure levy funding gap. So that's been published already. That's about 420 million or something like that. So there's various different things that come together within this prospectus that helps us essentially tick off over the next sort of decade as we start focus on finding pots of money to deliver these items, essentially.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Merritt.
I think I'd echo the other comments around the table. We really could do with some sense of the costs and overall, because if this adds up to 300 billion and the CA is only going to get 60 million over the next 10 years, then we need to do some major pruning. So that and all, in terms of the economic side of it, are we just talking about costs, or are we also talking about cost benefit analyses, at least some CBA estimate or a GVA estimate? That's the sort of information that's important towards a prioritisation. It's not the whole story, because you may decide, yes, it's a poor CVA, but it actually is essential to make other things happen. There does need to be some additional prioritisation. Why would this be particularly important, relative to another scheme? So it's a work in progress. I obviously recognise that, and absolutely understand the point. We've got to do some basic work in terms of, well, we don't know what the government's going to give us the opportunities on. So if we've got a long list, that obviously helps to make sure that we don't get caught out and miss opportunities. But we know that the COE is going to have we know what the budget is for the next 10 years. Actually, then looking against that, well, what are the things that we particularly want to ask? We do need to land at some point in terms of being clear on what those asks are of the CA, and hopefully we will get an opportunity to comment when it's in that state. I do have some dot and comma on some of the particular schemes, but
would you want to go through those?
Yeah. I mean, the front of station is quite an interesting one. We know that the additional monies are needed to provide the loop for the terminating buses at the station, and without that, we can't get some of the efficiencies in bus routing. We can't necessarily get some of the services that don't serve the station to get to the station, like the Selby services. So there are some important arguments just on the particular item. But I mean, the detail on the rail station says we're expecting a doubling of passengers. But the front of station scheme does not provide a doubling or of the bus stop provision, the turning areas and so on to match that. We clearly will have a limited amount of car parking at the station, so actually there'll probably need to be a substantial increase in public transport use to and from the station to match the doubling of rail passengers. But as I say, the current scheme doesn't cover that, and that perhaps is something that the scheme should be. Yes, we've got one scheme we've got to finish, but actually it's not the end of the story for the next 10, 20 years. So that was one I particularly wanted to pick up. There's references to decarbonising and EV strategies, but we have a quarter of the city is terraced properties, many of which there's no adequate EV schemes for at the moment. We have flagged that, I know, in the general count, in other council documents, but there's nothing in here that I could find about how we're going to challenge that. And that's one where there's frankly some potential early wins with the government changing some of the rules on cross pavement charging. And we need to have some answers for the quarter. Otherwise, people in the terraced areas will continue to buy petrol, fossil fuel vehicles and not move towards the EVs that we need in terms of reducing carbon and improving air quality. So I think that's something else that needs flagging better in the document. You've mentioned improving the resilience of the highway network, which appears to be mainly addressed in terms of the road bit of it, but actually an absolutely massive part of the highway network is the drainage systems, which were designed for very different levels of rainfall from the ones that we anticipate as a result of climate change, bringing high risks of local flooding if they are not, if improvements to capacity are not addressed, where there's big opportunities in terms of biodiversity from the SUDS type schemes that are needed to address that. So again, on highway schemes for resilience and climate change, I think there needs to be a more comprehensive look to ensure that we pick up that part of the highway infrastructure. So as I say, I'm sorry, they're a bit dot and comma, but I don't want to miss the opportunity to pick up those issues. Also, in terms of decarbonising transport, the last mile delivery schemes that we've failed to make any progress on, despite a DEFRA grant to deliver a local scheme. I know there are some further opportunities, I think, that have come up in discussions with with Amazon and other people recently. So again, that's one I'd like to pick up.
Thank you. I'll get my two particular points out of the way whilst we're doing that. The references to Hagsby Station, try and avoid saying for Hagsby residents, this will be a great thing. It's not just for Hagsby residents, it's for the villages in the north of the city, so don't underplay that. There's a sort of anticipated delivery date of 34-35, which I don't know whether that's correct. I'd heard an earlier date, so unless there's something I'm not aware of, you might want to check the accuracy of that date. Unless I found, an Iron Age settlement that we don't know about, but be worth checking that. Thank you. Councillor Eyre, so you had your hand up. But...
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it was sort of going back to that wider point again, and I thought perhaps a way through it. I mean, if we're honest, there are three ways we're going to raise funding for any of these schemes. We're either going to do it ourselves, through selling capital or borrowing. There's the regional opportunities through the combined authority, or there's national. At the moment, all of those come with a certain level of political risk and political flux and political change. We are at a point at the moment where we have triple alignment on one of those particular areas. Is it worth perhaps, I would like to see money going into those columns as well, in terms of that. I mean, it's one thing I like looking at less than KPIs, it's risk analysis things, of actually having something like that across that will actually put down, is this particular scheme, is it a local priority? Green or square rating in terms of that one? Is it a regional priority? Does it sit something in terms of what the combined authority is looking to do? Is it a national priority? Does it sit with that? If you're hitting across 3 greens, then you get into a point of going, well, actually, this scheme is potentially something that we should be progressing. If you're hitting 2 reds, then you're probably going to look at it and go, you know what, less time about that. And that allows you to bring some flexibility in, that if you then get a new mayor who decides maybe not knitted dolphins or whatever it was, but wants to buy random hotels in Scarborough, then you can start going, right, well, our middle column has gone to red for pretty much everything that we've got, but we've still got greens in certain areas. So that allows you to have a little bit more of a dynamic prioritization based on whether you think there's a high level of success.
Thank you. So a kind of a sort of rag rating of things that may change in terms of signals from national or regional government. Okay, thank you. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. Yep, I echo an awful lot of what has been said today in terms of focusing, prioritisation, and dare I say it, realism. Yes, we can all have vision, but we've got to be realistic as to what we can actually deliver in today's climate. Can I just be more provincial, if you like, and echo what Chair has said in terms of the completion date for what I'll call the York North rail station. My understanding is 27-28 is the likely completion date of it, and I'd be very disappointed if it were to slip further. Can I be equally provincial and just query the 200,000 which appears to be in the pot for enhancing our 2 district shopping centres over in Acomb on the one hand and in the Haxby area in the other one? I just query whether additional work has been done in respect of those 2 schemes, and if it's possible to let the ward councillors in both areas have some further and better particulars. It'd be quite invidious to ask you to churn that out verbally tonight.
Thank you. Are you okay to pick that point up?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to say it came under the Great Places Fund from the Combined Authority. The regeneration team have been working on the grant funding agreement, which has to set out the outcomes that match the Great Places Fund expected outcomes, but they're almost at a point of being able to share it, so we can take that back and ask the regeneration team to share that with appropriate ward councillors, both Acomb and Haxby.
Thank you.
Right?
Councillor Widdowson.
Definitely echo what everyone's saying. It needs to be a really short prioritised list, because the way that it goes down is you lose the will to live, and you will be spending, exactly as both sides have said, you will be spending an awful lot of officers' time on possibly maybe winning the lottery in 5 years' time. So it's just, I really think that needs looking at. The other bit, 2 other areas I'd like to think about is all the conversations I've had with the Combined Authority to stop the beauty parade and the let's see if we can get the money or not is moving towards a strategic authority. So that isn't in this strategy, and I know that that's what the Combined Authority wish to do. So that needs reflecting in here some way, because once you're a strategic authority, you get given the money and then you decide.
It's an established strategic authority.
I'm sorry, an established strategic authority then, which I know Greater Manchester et al. Are. So we're still, to say what the chair said, we're still at the stage where we're still doing a beauty parade and bidding in, which devolution was supposed to stop, but it's continued. So we have to get to whatever that level is, and that needs putting in here somewhere. And then just to continue on councillor merits, you know, full stops and all the rest of it. You've got a few projects in here. So the Breck one from the University of York, that has been done elsewhere. So it's conversations that, you know, I know that in the various different water authorities that I've worked with, this is known technology. It may be slightly different, but you've got to think about that. And where you've got the energy independence, if that's being done with the bright sparks, you know, how is that actually going to work across the piece? We're putting some skin in the game. How does that work? And there's not enough detail in here to actually make it to support you in anything that it is you want to do. So I think some of these big projects, once they hit the right level in prioritisation, would be worthy of another conversation around here to actually understand what they're doing, but not if they're on the unicorn list towards the bottom.
I think that if we take Harewood Wyn as a case in point, obviously that's on the list, but that's jumped through the other hoops in terms of outline business case. So that's if you think of the Harewood Wyn project, that is perhaps gives a sample of what could happen to some of the others if they jump through the funding and other regulatory hoops. So you couldn't reflect all of that in this report, but obviously there would need to be detail underpinning each of the projects in terms of timeline, funding, business case, benefit analysis, again, sort of linking back to other strategies, one of which we've just discussed in terms of how does a project address or meet those strategic objectives. So yeah, it's difficult. You want more detail, but then you want less in terms of it needs to be digestible but sufficiently detailed. But they're two separate things. I would think a prospectus, you're right, would be that's your pitch. If it's that thick, you're not going to get anywhere. But yeah, you would need the detail underpinning it, which, as we've seen with the Harewood Wyn project, does exist and can be produced. Just being clear what the prospectus is and what it isn't. Any other comments? Councillor Lomas.
Thank you, and thanks, officers, for presenting this and all the work that's gone into it. I just wanted to make a comment on the kind of the Goldilocks nature of this prospectus, of whether it needs more detail, less detail, a longer list, a shorter list. I think it's almost impossible to get that right, because what we don't want to be in a situation of is we don't want to be in a situation with such a short list that the opportunities arise that we can't then capitalise on. So we don't want to be in a situation where suddenly somebody somewhere decides they've got money for a certain type of scheme and there's none of that type of scheme on our list. We also don't want a list that's so long that it's not things that we as members can buy into. And I think the purpose of bringing the item here was to get that kind of overview of, are there things on this list that you definitely think we shouldn't be prioritising? Are there things on this list that you think should be right at the top of that priority queue? And that's not saying that anything is necessarily going to kind of, you know, jump over other things, because again, it will depend what opportunities come our way and what we're able to make best use of. But I personally think it's really important that there is member and cross-party member input into the long-term schemes that this council is going to pursue. And then you move away from just jumping at whatever comes in front of you and is most expedient to do, because you've got a plan. You've got a plan. You've got some things that you think, as and when opportunities arise, we'll make best use of them. And ultimately that then limits the amount that we have to invest in terms of our capital borrowing to do the things that we all want to see done in the city. Allows us to use our capital borrowing programme to cover some of the other items that nobody else is ever going to pay for, like maintaining, repairing, restoring the things that we've already got and the infrastructure that we already have. So I would encourage you to kind of get on board with this, because it's your chance to have a say, no matter whether, you know, you agree with every single scheme, or every single scheme is what you would put at the top of your list, or not. But have your say on what is going to be the prospectus that we'll use to guide and direct decision making.
Thank you. Councillor Eyre, then Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Very briefly, 100% agree with that. The problem we've got is that we've got the prospectus. So officers sort of alluded to the fact that there are officers pitching for things in the background that haven't made it on here. For that process to work, which is God forbid, we would need all of those as well, because those schemes are already being sifted before they get to scrutiny, and this is the final for prioritisation. I don't know what transport officers may have suggested to you, and you've not put forward, or other people may put forward. So I don't know how you get that process from the very beginning to get the sort of the long list, which then gets to the short list, the shortish list that gets to scrutiny.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Thanks, Chair. And I guess I just wanted to say that I'm as on board as I can be with this, and I take on board what you're saying, Councillor Lomas. But if I'm putting this as sort of, I don't know, as openly as I can, as a frustrated councillor that's served for, well, blimey, over 7 years now, believe it or not. I think this idea of having very expensive officers working very hard on many things, most of which won't come off, and I understand why they're doing it, that's difficult to sit next to the other side of the coin, which I know you're all too familiar with, Councillor Lomas, and all of us, of the day-to-day services struggling to do anything close to what I would call real demand from residents. And you just think, how much of that resource will come good? And it sounds like the answer today is we don't know how much of that resource will come good. And I think that's a problem. And if it's something we need to start lobbying more clearly on to government, then maybe we should. I get why we're in this position. I really do. It's frustrating. Sorry.
It takes me back to the discussions we had at the point, you know, should we go for a mayoral combined authority or not? And telling ourselves at the time, well, you know, we wouldn't have designed it this way, but this is, you know, this is the only game in time in town. You know, maybe perhaps we're too passive in terms of saying we're just here to receive whatever comes at us, and we'll kind of scuttle around and try and come up with things that we think might get us some money. There's a bigger sort of systemic issue there. That's not to say we shouldn't want to try and shape it. Otherwise, if we don't, what's the point of us being here? But let's not get too fatalistic about it. You know, but you know, maybe the sort of fair funding review, some things might come out of that that, you know, reflects the ongoing cost of building things and maintaining them, the ongoing cost of providing, you know, decent levels of service that we all, you know, want our residents to receive. It's difficult to look at this in isolation and just forget about the other things that we know are, you know, it need a fixing. But if we're thinking about it, I'd like to think others are thinking about it in decision-making positions, not necessarily in this authority, but certainly kind of above us. I hope that's the case. Otherwise, I'd be a bit sad. Otherwise, but yeah, it's a valid point to make, and I'm sure residents watching us would want us to make that point. So thank you for making it. I don't expect you to respond to any of that, but other than to nod. Are there any other points anybody would like to make before Councillor Widdowson?
Just final point, I promise you.
Okay.
With the long list and everything else that you've got, and the amount of resource that will suck up and use, you know, going to everybody's points around there, surely we must also be in a position to say it doesn't matter if that unicorn amount of money comes along it's a no. So there must be, in that big long list of things, it is so, you know, it scores 1 out of 10 compared to the stuff at the top that's scoring 11 out of 10, that we just go, actually, it's not worth putting the resource and the effort in. And we should be brave enough to say it doesn't fit what we're looking for, no matter how serendipitous it might be. We don't put the cost in up at the front to do it. Is that part of the thinking?
Because this is built out of the mayoral priority pipeline that was approved last year, we already had a starting place. So that long list has already gone essentially and been drilled down to these items. What these combined with some of the city partners sort of key things that they think would make a biggest difference to residents' lives, like the Cordial Centre and Bio Yorkshire, and the communication creator catalyst. What this does though, is it stops officers wasting time on other things. So it means that you've got about, I think, 15 maybe items that we would sit on a shelf, and then should the opportunity present itself, we would go to the list and say, right, from this list that has now got cross-party support, what do we need to focus on next? So for example, taking highways and transport, all of the items that are to do with transport in this list are starting a conversation about the transport settlement for next year, because we know we're going to get a transport settlement next year. What we don't know, and we haven't yet got what this part of going through today's process is about, is are these the right things on the transport list? So if you look at my page, or your page 103, there's a list of local transport strategy schemes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, which have come directly from the transport team. So we've worked with policy officers across the council to make sure that the description within the prospectus covers the types of things that they would expect to see, that they would then hope that you expect to see. So I think it's your page 103, or it's my page 43. Councillor, you?
Yeah.
It is, yeah, it is. Okay, good. So it's just to focus our attention. So take your point. We're not going to be running down rabbit holes because we've got better things to do. However, it does mean that should the opportunity present itself, we've got a ready reckon a guide to go to.
Yeah, you know, and these things come out of the local transport strategy implementation plan, so they're not just things that they've come from somewhere. Councillor Taylor.
Thanks, Chair. And I guess that's a helpful response, but I would say even to that, on the example you've given, some of those transport items taken on their own still need significant fleshing out. So dial and ride, for example, as far as members are aware, it's not like we have some sort of, doesn't work in this case, but a shovel-ready alternative that is good to go. If we did, then I think, yeah, I'd get the argument more solidly. I mean, I accept it in other cases, but that transport one, there's some massive stuff there. Some are at different levels. I think the sustainable travel corridor is much more advanced than the dial and ride example. So I know we can just keep going round and round, but it just caught my attention as soon as you pointed it out. Yeah. That was all.
Yeah, and I know it's a source of frustration for many of us who've tried to push the case for some projects, and as you say, some are of a more advanced stage than others. But that's just how resources have been allocated, and there's nothing we can do here about that. If there are no other points, I'll draw that discussion to a close. Thank you very much for staying with us. In terms of points that were raised, there were discussion around the basis for prioritisation, maybe looking at adding columns for local, regional, national priorities, which may change, and if the RAG rating change, it may mean that something falls down the list. But it's just having that, being able to be nimble if there is a sort of change in circumstances. And points made around the future-proofing station frontage was mentioned as as an example of, even though this phase may be sort of done, things happening elsewhere. You know, doubling of rail passenger numbers might require station frontage 2.0 to do other things. I'm sure there's lots more beside that you've taken notes of. But thank you for your time and your attendance. Okay. Agenda item 8, shared vision, and thank you, Councillor Lomas. You don't have to stay for the rest, but you're welcome to. Shared vision for scrutiny in York. So this is tabled primarily for information, just to so members are aware of the output of the work that's been done by a working group that was convened at the request of executive to pull together this document, which is a shared vision for scrutiny, and a executive scrutiny protocol, which has gone or is going to audit and governance.
It has gone.
Has gone. Yes. Thank you. Was it accepted? Okay. Well, that's good. So this shared vision won't form part of the council's constitution, but it is something that is there to guide us and remind us what we have collectively committed to in terms of how we want the scrutiny function to operate within the council. So I'll say nothing more other than to reread it occasionally. Councillor Lomas.
Councillor Douglas is on her way down. She'll be here in a moment.
Okay.
In case anyone has anything for her on it.
I hope she hasn't waited. Oh, here she is. Seamless. Good evening. You are. Which agenda item do you think you're here to talk to us about? The shared vision.
Yes.
Do take a seat.
Okay.
So I was just explaining the process that we've been through, whereby following on from the peer review, which led to the action plan, which led to a working group being put together to produce this document, the shared vision, and the executive scrutiny protocol, which has now been approved by audit and governance. So I was saying to members, this is our aid memoir. This is something for us to refer to ensure that we are living the values that are set out in here as we move forward with the new scrutiny arrangements, which are fewer formal meetings, but work happening in different ways in terms of task and finish groups and informal briefings. I think it's really for members to note, really, and if members have any questions for me or for Councillor Douglas, be happy to receive them. Would you like to add anything, Councillor Douglas?
I will do, just to say that I thought that it was a really productive working environment between the chairs and vice chairs of the scrutiny committees, and I'd like to thank Councillor Fenton for all the work that he did with bringing those people together and making sure that a lot of different voices were heard in this, and I think it's a really constructive path forward that I hope will enable members to feel like they're being have a greater voice in scrutiny at earlier stage, to be more involved in policy development and recommendations through to executive, which I think can only be a positive thing. So yeah, and that's why I'm here, really, to thank you for the work that you've done, and Councillor Merritt as well, and the other chairs and vice chairs. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Just to say that we have undertaken to keep the new arrangements under review. So if we find that any aspects are not working as we'd hoped or intended, there'll be the opportunity for us to tweak arrangements. But what I must say is we now have a dedicated scrutiny officer in post, who's James. Welcome, James. Well, James has been here before in his role as democracy officer, but James is now here as a dedicated scrutiny officer, which I think, well, I know will support us to undertake even more meaningful and impactful scrutiny, and I think we're all committed to making that work, and look forward to working with James in his new role. Thank you. No pressure.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Any comments or questions from members on the shared vision? No. Thank you very much, and thank you for joining us, Councillor Douglas.
Short and sweet. Thank you.
We're doing very well tonight in terms of keeping things moving, which is as it should be. But however, we now come to the work plan, where I'm sure everything will go horribly off the rails. So yes, thank you. So the work plan item, we have, having just said, we're working on a new scrutiny operating model where we're meeting less frequently in public. Guess what? We've got an extra public meeting on the 1st of October, but there are good reasons for that. Primarily to receive the report of the Task and Finish group on the Boundary Commission review. So Scrutiny was asked to convene a Task and Finish group to, with a view to seeking to come up with a recommendation to go to executive, to then in turn go to full council for a council response to the Boundary Commission consultation on how many councillors should there be on City of York Council. So that's the scope of that piece of work. And in order for all the timings to work, there had to be a meeting around this time for us to receive that report and consider it. So that will be the main reason for having that meeting. But whilst we're at it, let's add another couple of items to the agenda. One of which is a pre-decision scrutiny report on Castle Gateway. So a couple of meetings back, we received a report on Outer Ring Road and Station Gateway. Didn't cover Castle Gateway because that wasn't ready, but the plan is, and no one's told me otherwise, that we will receive something at the 1st of October meeting. And then finally, another piece of pre-decision scrutiny on a draft communication strategy, which I think comes out of some some work that audit and governance have been doing. So that seemed an opportune moment to cover those items in order for them to go forward for decision, having received input from ourselves. So that's October. November, we've got the complaints compliments annual report. By that point, we should have received some information from Ian Cunningham along the lines of the discussion we had earlier around response times. And whilst that's not directly related to this report, it may, having that information in conjunction with this, may support a discussion around if there's a committee we want to do anything, Task and Finish group or otherwise, around customer service. We've got petitions and council motions, schedules, and then a couple of items under our climate change scrutiny remits. And I need to sit down myself and the Vice Chair with Sean Gibbons to better understand what the ask will be on those two items. So I think when I discussed them with Sean, I think there was still some doubt around the timing of decisions on those. So I just need to make sure that we know what it is we're getting and we're not talking about something after a decision has been made. And then in January, we'll have the outputs of another Task and Finish group. This is the group looking at the next year's budget and the medium-term financial strategy. So again, no pressure on producing a fine piece of work to bring back to scrutiny there. Are there any comments or questions from members on what's coming up? Nope. Okay. So item 10, urgent business. I've not been notified of any urgent business, so I will bring the meeting to a close and thank you for your attendance and participation. Good night.